We live. Hello to everybody from New Zealand. It's a lovely day here in Auckland. I am very pleased to be joined by my industry experts here today. Um, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Arunima, and I'm the CEO and a senior license advisor at Ames Global. We've got Zinnia here, who is our operations manager and also senior advisor. But most importantly, we have got someone joining us today who's seen the ins and outs of the international education industry in New Zealand, Pamela Miller-Staggers. Pamela, thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really are pleased that you could spare time and bring all of your wisdom to have a yarn with us today.
You're absolutely welcome, and it's lovely to see both of you. Such successful young women, international student background, recruited back in the day by myself.
Absolutely. You got me into the country, so I always say that. Yeah. So I don't know about the young part anymore. I'm glad that I'm still classified in the young part because something that I'm kind of on the cusp, but thank you for that. No. Pamela, for those of us, that are joining us today, they don't know about you, but they are looking at international education. Can you please introduce yourself so that then I can tell people why we're having this really unique session? Because it is quite different. No one in the industry does something like this. So it is quite unique. And I will set the scene once we know more about you.
Yeah, my background, I'm basically sort of walk my talk. I mean, I originally was born in New Zealand, educated here and also educated offshore, worked internationally, worked globally, ended up at this moment in time back in New Zealand, where I actually went into the international market. So worked both in the in the Polytech and the university sector within New Zealand, traveled internationally, seen a lot of different trends come, go, and just have quite a wealth of knowledge due to all my exposure internationally with this market.
Exactly. And I think that's why we wanted to have a conversation with you, which is a third party person who's seen the industry through lows and highs, who's been in the industry for 18 plus years. And understands the ins and outs of the education industry. So I am going to sort of open up our session now. The reason why we're having this session, for those of you that are listening to us, we wanted to have a conversation around the international education space in New Zealand. And for those of you that are looking at coming into New Zealand to study, we wanted to tell you where it's sitting and where we think it's going to be heading. I mean, I personally think that, after working in the immigration industry for 15 odd years, that international education and the course choice is almost like a backwards exercise from, the employment market and the immigration market, and where those silos sit. And they are connected, isn't it? They're not disconnected. So let's just open this up.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, Pamela, people that are coming in, I mean, and from an immigration perspective, Zinnia, I'll open it up. From an education perspective, Pamela, people have been coming into New Zealand. There's been this really skewed balance. There's never been a balance in the employment market in the sectors where there's jobs, and New Zealand needs those people versus the courses that are attracting these students coming into New Zealand. Why do you think this is, and what are the learnings do you think that we can have from all of this?
I think what's really relevant as an international student, parents of potential international students, is to, once you've actually looked hard and fast at choosing the country, what kind of outcomes you want for your investment in study, is to look at the job market. Often, when you're speaking to students and families, they are actually not au fait with the job market. New Zealand is a smaller country. It's entrepreneurial, but it is different from most people's home countries. I mean, the degrees are called different names. The programs are set up differently. What is a short-term skill and a long-term skill list? It's very, very important. So many students, you talk to them offshore and their families, and they're so focused on a certain program, which actually doesn't make sense because there is not an employment market and good career outcomes. I mean, right now
Exactly.
we're in a very unique situation post-COVID. We've always encouraged internationalization, to have global students, global alumni. There have been no borders. We've said, born in Mumbai, educated in New Zealand, working in Sydney. And that has been what has been a priority for employers, employees all around the world. We now have a world with borders. It will
Yeah.
change, but currently we are not borderless.
Yeah.
But students looking to come to New Zealand need to be looking at doing research. It's amazing how many family students invest so much money to
That's
come
right.
and do something with actually no awareness of the program or the career outcomes.
Exactly.
And
And I think that sort of hits the nail on its head, isn't it? That they come with a complete disconnect from the market that they are going to be investing so
yeah,
heavily in and studying.
yeah.
I think, Zinnia, from an immigration perspective, where do you think those pockets are, and what do you see from a purely immigration perspective? Because you don't really, do too much in the education space. Tell us from an immigration perspective, what are your views, and where do you see disconnects? You deal with employers in New Zealand, and you often know where there's gaps.
So I think one of the main things that we've got an issue with from an immigration perspective, where students are coming in coming in for courses that we essentially cannot get work visas done for because they don't meet immigration's requirements, and immigration's requirements are pretty high in order to get a certain type of work visas. I mean, post-study work visa is given as of right. But after that, people have to think beyond that, because most of these people will come in, make that investment with the goal of residence. And how do we get them to residence if the course they choose is not going to meet those immigration requirements? So it's about tying in immigration with the employment that is in a particular country. So you tie the economic environment, the employment market, with the immigration policies, and those two aspects marry each other, and that should form the basis of the decision that they make when they're choosing their course.
Cool.
And
No, I think that's
it has to be a sustainable choice too. I mean, looking at New Zealand and most countries now post-COVID, there's going to be a dip in employment in companies that haven't managed to survive. So there is going to be a huge demand for employment. And the sectors that New Zealand welcomes international students. They're part of our DNA now, and very important in so many areas within the country. The expertise they bring in, the backgrounds they bring in, the areas that I think are going to be sustainable long term are things like engineering. I mean, New Zealand has had a shortage of engineers for some time. I know there's many facets of engineering, construction, mechanical, electrical, civil, etc. But long-term engineering, I think, is something that will be sustainable to study within New Zealand. Things like IT always in demand.
Yeah.
I think health sciences now too, med lab technology, nursing. I mean, we have a major growth industry in the geriatric population, looking at the areas, looking at the demographics, looking at
That's right.
all of those things
So I think
to
what
make
I'm getting
good
from this
choices.
is I mean, what we see, and I think I've got these questions and I will kind of come to what industries and what the future lies. But what I can see from this conversation, hear from what you're telling us, is that the international education has been quite loose. And I think I want to hone a little bit more into, before we get into those specific industry sets. You've obviously, Pamela, traveled around the world. You understand the psyches of, the mindset of the people that are sitting in these countries and what's going on in their head when they're looking at the choices of these courses. And I think you started off with that there's a lot of influence, there's a lot of peer pressure. You've done this, so you must do this. My question to you, just to kind of sum it up for people that are listening, is that what are some of the things that a student must be looking at now in the 2020 that we're sitting today, before they're looking at an education journey to New Zealand? What are some of the core things that they must consider if they are looking at studying here?
Well, it depends on what the kind of outcomes they want too. If they want a very good quality education that they want to return home with, for, often at postgrad stage, for example, MBAs, to move up within their companies in their home countries, and they're lacking any international exposure. If that's one priority, I mean, there are so many priorities as to why students want to study. Sometimes.
But clearly the lens is changing now, isn't it? We need to change the lens, and we need to change how we used to look at international education. And I think that's what we can feel as part of COVID, because from an immigration perspective, we know for a fact that there's lots of areas where there's no talent available. And often, for the longest time, I've said why international education can't sync up with those areas. Zenia, do you want to add anything in that area from somebody coming in?
I think I'm going to use an example here, because I think this is just a lot clearer to provide perspective on this with an example. So say somebody comes in to study a course, they get their post-study open work visa after that, and then the work visa expires, and naturally they'll go onto a talent visa if it's an accredited employer, but looks like that category is on its way out, or they'll go for an essential skill work visa. So the thing is, at some point, the labor market will have to be tested. You'll have to prove that New Zealanders are not available for the role, which is why the migrant worker got it. Now, if they're coming in for courses that already has a healthy New Zealand population available for that job, that, the course that will lead to those career outcomes, there's a lot of New Zealanders available. It's going to be much harder to get a visa. And if you do end up getting a visa, you could end up with low-skilled roles which don't have a pathway to residence. So, all of that investment and the money you put into studying a course, it is so important to make a prediction as to where the economic market, the labor market is going, where the immigration policies are going, work them out together, and then come back to your decision.
Yeah, that's right.
Pamela, I want to get into this, and I think that's leading us into sort of this space where we're getting into. So one of the areas that many people are skeptical about, and that's, I'm across a lot of groups where people are talking about it, and often there's this connection between international education and immigration, which is taken. They are two separate industries, but they can often lead into each other, which is what it is. Because there seems to be this repetitive pattern in the international education industry. You open the door to international students because it's a $5 billion industry, but then the job market tightens, and then a lot of these students have no pathways, and so they've spent a lot of money in coming here to give the economy a boost, and that cycle sort of that continues. I mean, you look at COVID-19, and we know those people that came in to do those low-level business courses are probably the worst affected. What is your take on this? Where do you see this going from here on? Are there any lessons to be learned? Can we get that balance right?
Yeah, again, I think it's research on the students' behalf. They have to not just get out of town and go to New Zealand. I mean, they need to absolutely, such a huge financial investment to look at what the outcomes are going to be. I mean, and a lot of families do that already. I mean, they look at different countries, and it's very, it's trendy at times. I mean, the UK was down because you couldn't stay and work. The US harder to get into, so people went from there. Canada, shorter people, let's all go to Canada. Australia, work rights change. I mean, so much is determined by work rights. So you can see that there's the balance of people want the ability to stay and work. So their research has to be done looking at that, what countries do have potential for working afterwards. I mean, maybe our immigration laws are going to change. I should imagine the work rights for international students will change. They were liberal, and the chance to study, work, and immigrate in New Zealand has been a real driver for people to come here and has been pretty successful. But maybe things are going to change to the extent that once students study here, they will be entitled to an internship and that will be it. And then they have to leave. The shape of the industry is changing and so fluid now that students have time to do the research and look at all of that. We are an attractive country now again. I mean, we always have been. But post-COVID, we're even more attractive because we're a safe environment, but our borders are still closed. So students have time to look at what their options are going to be. And I know a lot of institutes are opting for online programs. But again, you know, there's issue with online programs too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of those students, if they are looking, and like you said, I mean, I'm an ex-international student and so is Zinnia. So and we turned out to be pretty good for the country as well. But I think when you look at an international student, they're not just coming in for the course. There's a whole lot of experience. There's a journey that's involved in it. You are at a career where you are at a point in your career where you're looking at taking it to the next level. So there's a lot more motivators than just the course. Zinnia, do you want to add to this before because I want to ask Pamela something after this before I close this topic off?
Yeah, I think one of the things is, where we say that research is so important for these international students. And I do think that research only forms a part of it because research combines, yes, you can Google and you can understand where the market sits and where your job opportunities are. But if you're not bringing immigration into it, you're probably still shooting yourself in the foot. And I feel like immigration is an area where like a layperson can't research and understand the policies. And I almost feel that a part of that research includes dealing with a professional in that space, because you can do some research on Google, but immigration knowledge, well, Google's almost more harmful in that case, because you pick up things and you miss. It's like diagnosing yourself on Google. It's almost like that. With immigration knowledge, I think a part of that research, an extension of that would be engagement with a professional who can actually make you understand that, yes, you can get the jobs that you want. You can do this course, you'll get that job. But what happens to your visa? Because at the end of the day, if you can't get your visa right, everything falls over.
Absolutely. I think that's spot on.
It's a package deal.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Pamela, Sorry. No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it constantly has blown my mind how much people invest. I look at, if you're buying a new car or something, you spend a huge amount of time researching it before you actually put the money out there. And, this industry has had a lot of ups and downs with a lot of people that haven't always been coming from the right place, countries that haven't been coming from the right place, and a lot of people being really ripped off, which is tragic to me. I know as a marketing person, I had to be able to look the student and the family in the eye and know that the investment was going to be worthwhile, because the money is huge.
Absolutely. And I think that perfectly leads me into my next question. And I know you and I have discussed this often offline, and I haven't given you this question. So I know you're not prepped. But I just want to pick on your vast experience and knowledge. So we know that the international, for people that are within New Zealand and they look at it from in here and say, well, I came here as a student, this was a rip-off and and they look back. And so we know that there's been highs and lows in the industry, but there was a certain period where it actually became really low. Like the quality, when I came, so many years ago, things were so different. What do you think went wrong because something definitely went wrong. So what went wrong, and what can we actually learn from it as an industry?
So many things went wrong. People became greedy. I think they started offering low-level programs with low-level English language entry requirements. The country ended up with a lot of graduates with very low credentials that actually there wasn't employment in the market for, so they were disillusioned, and it was very unfair. I mean, I think that's has changed hugely. There's a lot of different things happening. I mean, we have a code of practice. I think, always it's looking at what are the long-term prospects for the investment. The ROI is the huge issue.
Exactly.
So I think, if you're going to get a diploma in business, what is the diploma in business actually really at the end of the day going to get you job-wise?
Exactly.
You're competing against Kiwis or with Kiwis, with New Zealanders. And if you have no work experience, you're not really a viable candidate for a position.
Exactly. Yeah.
Getting work too, there's so many things involved in that. It's not just the credential. I mean, just graduating from a good institute, be it a Polytech, an ITP, or a university, just being a graduate doesn't get you employment. No. I mean, no. You've got to get work experience in your host country. You have no networks. Sometimes the language skills, the customs are lacking. We've done a huge thing in New Zealand of working very hard with employers to make them aware of the potential with international students, but that's a learning curve too. That's still a work in process. Things like students having to volunteer, looking before they even come here, what kind of companies are here? If they want to work in IT, what IT companies do we have? What are they currently involved in? What is the scope long term for IT projects? And New Zealand is also working really hard at getting partnerships with industry so that students can seg into industry. I mean, sometimes internships, being part of the program, are really essential too. I think that puts people out in the industry, gives them local skills. All of that's part of it.
Zania, you're gonna add something here?
Yeah, I think from when I work with employers, through when they're looking to hire migrants, when I'm working with employers, one of a resounding message that comes through is employers they are more flexible with who they hire in terms of the skills that are out there. But what they want to know is, how is this particular international student, if we bring them on board, how are they going to treat our clients? And that's the measure that the employers are screening with. It's not so much, of course, company cultural fit, but a lot of employers understand that, culture can be different and it might take a while for them to culturally amalgamate within the company. But one thing that the employers are not willing to compromise on in any shape or form would be, and we can take ourselves as an example as well, at Ames Global, is how the ethos that the international student carries and how they're going to treat their clients, because that's their brand. And it's a question that comes to my mind, and I don't have the answer to this, is the type, I'm actually quite curious as to the type of support institutes are providing to international students who are about to graduate to be job ready, which is not just about make sure that you can interview well, make sure you can do, it's not just about the hard skills and how to write a CV.
It's soft skills, isn't it? It's things that matter the most. Yeah.
It's when you interview, you're picking up all of these subconscious clues during an interview process with the
Yeah.
client. And I think that is something that I am personally, as a licensed advisor, always curious as to how are these students being prepared? What support are they getting by institutes to be job ready in a more holistic sense?
Well, I mean, different institutes offer different things. I know my previous university I worked for had interns on campus, which was a setup where they could be linked with industry, had alumni coming on campus, talking to students, job fairs on campus, but and just providing students with programs that they could learn local culture, local mode of business, how things operate. But again, too, that is a big push that I always did offshore. So many students come, hang out in their own cliques once they're here. You walk around a campus and there are different ethnic groups just hanging out together, not integrating. And they may as well stay home, because what is the point in coming if you're not going to integrate? It starts with you learning. It starts learning colloquialisms. It starts with picking up slang. It starts with local customs, all of those things. You know,
So I think I'm going to flip the question for you, Pamela, because we know that institutes have support and we know that there's support and they all talk about support. From your perspective, without talking about any specific institute, you've been in the industry for such a long time. What do you think that institutes need to do better in being able to help with those soft skills? That's sort of my question.
I think from day one, having all of those amenities available, you know, for the, not just looking, I mean, once upon a time, universities in particular, they give somebody an education. That's all their responsibility really is. I mean, and a lot of people take up degrees, programs that in the current world market, there is actually no opportunity for employment. But again, that's not the moral responsibility of the university. But now I think that trend has changed so much. Now universities want their alumni to be successful because it costs, and that investment to be getting young people off on their first foot on the ladder. And I think universities, institutes focus a lot on that from the beginning. So I think it's the responsibility, and they do take that on board, to be working with students from day one, you know, looking long term. And I think incorporating internships within programs is huge, because that puts them in the workforce. That gives companies, employers a chance to actually see, you know, what kind of talent, ability international students have.
And it really helps the students get their first foot in, isn't it? Which is the hardest part. Get that first step right.
Yeah. I absolutely think the students that are the most successful in getting employment often are the ones that have come from programs that have built-in internships.
Brilliant. So there's obviously, you know, there's a conversation that needs to start happening now within the education industry, and it needs to happen, you know, within ENZ, within these universities, within providers, to think how they can do things differently post-COVID. But we're coming to the end of the session, but I do want to ask, you know, wrap it up with this really, really important question to both of you. Zinnia, I'm going to start off with you. You know, with students that are coming, we've talked about that there's research, there's things that need to be done differently. You need to align yourself with immigration and employment. What are the industries from an immigration perspective and the employment perspective? Where do you see those gaps? And I often, when I talk to these migrants, one of the things that I say to them is that if I, as a New Zealand citizen, can get up and do your job because you don't have those any specialist skills, then there's clearly a problem. And that's sort of the test of it, isn't it? So Zinnia, can you just sort of take us through what industries, according to you, are the places where there's gaps that international education quite, you know, can fill in?
So there are skill shortage lists which immigration has, which has an outline of all the areas which have skill shortages, long-term, regional. But it doesn't always have to be a skill shortage area for you to have good employment prospects. And I think that that's a clear message. So some of the areas that I'm going to talk about now are the ones that I have done work visas for and have had a lot of ease getting work visas in residencies. The immigration doesn't go right deep down nitty gritty into verification because they are just areas, credible shortages in there. So, agriculture is one area, but not all of it. So agriculture can have shortage on a lower skill level as well. But on a more skilled employment level, you have things like dairy, all types of farmers, really, dairy, beef, pig farmers. Viticulture is a really upcoming area. There's a lot of shortage there as well. And there are jobs that actually will lead you to residence as well in that space. Dairy sector is especially short of workers. So that's another area where, again, you do have that ability where you could fall down to a lower skill in that, and that lower skill may not take you to residence opportunities. So that's why it's important, when we talk about that research, is to know your immigration options.
So just give me those industries, give me those wider industries so we can.
So we've got agriculture, and those are some of the areas that I said. We've construction, but not all types of construction. The more quantity surveyor, construction project manager, building associate, site foremen, brilliant areas, brilliant employment opportunities here as well. We've got your medical registered nurse, always hot. Like, it's always an area that is very welcoming of international students. There's physiotherapists where there's opportunity for people to actually study and become a physiotherapist.
All medical, we're looking at all medical health sciences. Yeah.
Radiation therapists, health sciences, specifically food technologists, again, fantastic environmental research, teachers, they've been in the news for a long time. We've got IT as well, but IT is more high-end IT. So the shortages are like systems engineer, network engineer, web developers, ICT project managers. Not so much. Not so much like call IT on the call. Not that specifically as much anymore.
Pamela, is there anything else that Zinnia may have sort of missed out? Is there anything else before I kind of wrap this up with the big question to you?
No, I sort of stated at the beginning of the session the areas and they're pretty much backing up what Zinnia is saying. Also, too, I mean, looking at global shortages, med lab science, with what's just gone down. I mean,
that's right.
There is a world shortage. There's always, SARS, every epidemic. I mean, there are global shortages. So again, that can be getting the credential in New Zealand, maybe doing an internship, and then being able to work in other countries, so not just the end result being living in New Zealand.
Right. Zinnia, is there anything else that you've missed in there at all?
I think probably engineers is really good because it's not just engineers, it's engineering technicians who are like the next step underneath. Anybody who's studying engineer will end up in one of those two pathways if the rest of the boxes are ticked.
Brilliant. Yeah. So I think that sort of leads me into sort of the big question, Pamela, that I started off with, and then I want to end off with the session is that how do you think that the balance between international education, New Zealand economy, and the interest of migrants coming to the country, without, of course, compromising any opportunities for New Zealanders, can be struck right by international education? What's your giveaway wisdom?
I think just going back to making the right choice with the study program. There will always be shortages in certain areas, and to focus on those. I mean, for now, just a general degree is not going to lead to employment as such, or guaranteed employment, but to focus on, I mean, we've talked about the long-term skill shortage, short-term skill shortage, that all will change overnight. Post-COVID. That list is worth nothing right now. So it's evolving. It's happening as we talk, where the areas are going to be. There's a big push now in New Zealand to train Kiwis in trades, to reskill them. So the international market needs to look at reskilling themselves too.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what the big message is, isn't it? You kind of need to, things are changing. And I think with Zinnia and I kind of dealing with these employers and knowing these markets, we can already see a shift. Things that are in the long term, in the RSL list may no longer be there for very long. So we know those movements. And I think that's where you kind of really need advice. Zinnia, is there anything else you have before I wrap the session up?
I do. It's not a question we had, discussed or planned on, but it is a question for both of you that I actually, through this conversation, I wrote it down. We talked a lot about students who they need to do their research and they need to do, all of that before they make the choice. But a lot of the students we have, especially in that business degree space, they came in those years and they're all business diploma holders. They've crossed the student visa journey. They don't have the opportunity to go back and do the research and do all of that, and they've crossed that part. What advice would you give to them? And I really want it from both of you, really.
Pamela, I'll let you go first, and then
I would say again, reskilling. It's just that's a very hard one, and it's also difficult to change majors. I mean, a lot of programs in New Zealand, if, you can't go from doing a degree, I always say, in basket weaving to a master's in rocket science.
Yeah.
It's very hard, that crossover. So that is a tricky situation. But
I think from an immigration perspective, putting my immigration hat on, we do deal with lots of these clients that have now come to sort of the dead end. And, our advice to them is pretty clear. We are going to have a session on Friday to cover specifically this, but either you look at reskilling or upskilling yourself. Most times it'll be reskilling because those diplomas level 5 and 6 at some PTs didn't really teach you anything. And so they will now need to be very clever with the investment. And I think the good thing with these people is they've kind of burned their fingers. They understand the idea behind really concrete research and making those right choices. So so there's this is an evolving conversation in the international education space. And Pamela, I really, really want to thank you on behalf of us at AIMS Global and those of you that will see this video, because you've got some fantastic advice in there. And I'm pretty hopeful that we will bring you back for more conversations around this.
Yeah, because we can stay tuned because things are changing so fast.
Absolutely. And I think each one of us can influence the change because we've all kind of been through the journey, all of us through COVID ourselves. Exactly. All right. Thank you guys for watching. We will
Thank you
soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Bye.